Well, I never claimed to be an artist. Tigers are one of the few animals that no matter how much I admire them, I will keep my distance. This should kind of be saying something because, I do live in Florida, and I will paddle down a creek with a 10-foot alligator only a few yards from me on the bank, and it doesn't bother me. I can look at a Florida panther as I'm crossing a path and it watching me, and even though I'm gonna keep my distance, I would still go back to that same path another time. But brown bears, polar bears, lions, and tigers, nope, not happening. Unfortunately, where tigers live, most of the time they stay very well clear of people. But every once in a while, if the conditions are right and they get a taste for human, they're a menace. And in the early 1900s, that's exactly what happened. Not only did it kill the most amount of people by any single animal ever recorded, but it also could not be found. Now, the number may not be 100%. The current estimate is that this tiger killed 436 people. But back in the early days of when this tiger started its killing spree, it might have been a couple more, might have been a couple less. No one was really sure. But in the late 1890s, there were some villages in western Nepal that started noticing people just disappearing. This wasn't completely abnormal. People get lost in the forest all the time, especially in this area. It's a very dense jungle. But then more and more people started to disappear, and more frequently than normal. Concerns started to build, and it began being clear that something was happening that shouldn't be happening. And for multiple years, this number just kept on increasing, the frequency kept on going up, and more people disappeared until 1903 when there were 200 missing people. Now at this time, the Nepalese government, and at this time, the Nepalese government finally started to act. They formed a long beat line, which I believe is just where you get guns and drums and you form a long line along an area and try to flush out animals. And they did this in the area where a lot of attacks were happening, and they walked through the jungle beating the line until they got to the Indian border, and then the attack stopped happening. Well, in Nepal that is, because in India things started right back up almost instantly. And over the next few years, the tiger would continue killing people in India. And one of the biggest problems with this tiger was that it wasn't just killing anybody it came across. It pretty much consistently stayed with women and children because, well, they were the easiest for it to attack. And not only was it killing women and children, it would do it blatantly in the middle of the day. Now, most of the time when a man-eating tiger or a tiger in general hunts, they do it at night and they're under the cover of darkness, and then, somebody's just walking through the woods and they just disappear. That's normal. But what would happen is that people would be doing like their normal chores in the middle of the day, and then they would be attacked and one of them would just be dragged off. On top of this tiger proved to be very smart and very elusive because it would kill somebody and then it wouldn't stay in the area long. It would move a good distance away overnight, and it was very well known for not attacking in the same spot twice. Like, it would just kill, move on to a next spot and kill. So it was very sporadic. No one could pin it down. Bounties were eventually set out to kill this tiger, and there were many people who tried, including people who were involved with the government, tried to go out and kill this tiger, but nothing helped. These were desperate times. In the beginning, when the tiger was pushed over to India, there had been 200 people killed, but over the next few years the number rose to 434, and that's when they basically were grasping at straws. What do we do about this? But when it hit 434 deaths, that's when Jim Corbett comes in. Now, Jim Corbett was a conservationist. He wasn't out there trophy hunting. That wasn't his goal. He did kill things on occasion. It was more like he knew how to use a gun. He would go to an area and he was well known for like taking down leopards and stuff that had attacked people, because leopards turn into man-eaters a decent amount. But he had never hunted a tiger before. This was all new to him. And he was approached by a high-ranking British official who knew of Jim and what he was able to do. He told Jim about the horror these people were facing and that there was reward for killing this tiger. But Jim didn't care about the money. He wouldn't do it unless the bounty was dropped. So there was nobody out there also trying to do this at the same time. And that was the other part of it. Anyone else who was out there who was trying to kill it, including people involved with the government, would be taken out. It would literally just be him. Now, the kind of morbid part about this is that he had to wait until there was another victim so he knew which village to go to. So that's exactly what he did. So he went to the village of Paley, which is where the next victim was killed. When he arrived at the village, there were only about 50 people who were living there at the time. They were so afraid to leave their homes that the doors were locked, and the village center was so disgusting that he could barely even stay there because of how disgusting it was. They were running out of food, they were scared to death, and they eventually started to come out, and they felt a little bit more comfortable with him knowing that he was there to kill the tiger, so they started coming out. But right after this woman was killed, for the next 3 nights, they could hear the tiger roaring out in the distance. So that's why they were so afraid to even leave their homes. They felt like they walked outside, they were going to get killed as well. And this is a big thing with this whole story, is everyone involved was so scared that some of the things that happened because people were scared, it just blows me away. I don't blame them, but you'll see what I'm talking about here in a minute. Now, that night there was a full moon, and so Jim decided that he was going to go out at night on a road that was completely illuminated, and he would sit there by a tree and wait to see if the tiger would come. And here's the thing, Jim seems like a badass, and he is, but he was just as scared too. The difference is he actually was brave. Now, that's the thing about bravery. It's not that you're not scared to do stuff, it's that you are scared to do stuff, but go to do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. His mind was playing tricks on him, and he said throughout the night he saw at least 1,000 tigers walking up the trail trying to get him. And he was so scared that he wanted to go back to the camp, but he also was like, I can't go back empty-handed. I can't disappoint these people. And he ended up falling asleep next to this tree. And fortunately for him, when his comrades, the people who he was with, actually came to find him, they just found him slump under that tree. No tiger had gotten to him. He got very fortunate in this situation. Now, back in the village, he was told the story of how this person was killed. He wanted to get as much information as possible so he can get a game plan in his mind of what he could do. A group of women were picking leaves, and they were climbing up these trees, picking the leaves and coming back down when their baskets were full. When the first one finished, she started climbing down the tree, and the tiger had been waiting for her. It walked up to her, jumped up on 2 legs, and grabbed her with its claws, pulled her out of the tree. When she hit the ground, she tried to get away. It let go of her, and as soon as she sat up, it grabbed her by the throat and dragged her off. And as it did so, it jumped over a ravine and just disappeared. Now, multiple attempts were made to save this woman. Multiple men with guns went out into the bush, and every single time they got to this tree line where they believed it was, they would hear roaring and they would just run back and retreat. And they did this 3 times till finally, when they got up to it the 3rd time, they heard the tiger in the bushes, and a man just shot straight in the air, and they could hear the tiger running through the woods. And Jim was like, "Why didn't you just shoot into the bush?" And the man said he was so afraid that if he accidentally shot the tiger and didn't kill it, it would kill all of them. So he didn't do that. He just scared it off. I mean, these people were absolutely terrified of what would happen, even if they angered this tiger. And eventually, when he realized that the tiger was not known to kill in the same spot twice, he decided to go 15 miles east to the town of Champawat. Now, when he arrived there, he was told a story of another woman that was recently killed. The villagers had heard screaming down this road. They looked around and saw a naked woman being carried by the tiger. She was screaming and beating her chest and trying to get people's attention and tried to get away from the tiger. And there were 20 men who witnessed this, but they all just stood there and watched in horror as she was dragged away, and the screaming eventually subsided. Now, Jim again asked, "Why didn't you do anything? You guys were there." They all responded they were too afraid to do anything, and she was bleeding a lot, and they're like, she was just too far gone. There was nothing we could do even if we stopped it from happening. A group of 60 men then went looking for her, and they found her body. She had been licked clean of all the blood that was on her, and the tiger didn't even eat her. It just killed her and left her. And while he was staying in Champawat, he waited for another attack to happen so he could basically rushed to the area and tried to track down the tiger. A few days went by. Then he saw a man running down the road towards him, completely exhausted and out of breath. The man, every single time he went to speak, he had to stop running to get a few words out, but every single time he would run toward him, he could not speak. Jim ran up to him and said, "Stop running, just tell me what happened." And all he could get out was that there was another tiger attack and he was sent to retrieve Jim. So Jim ran back to his bungalow, grabbed his gun, and just told the man, "Don't say anything, just take me to where this is." Now, when he arrived at this small village, there was a group of people, and the group told him that a group of women had been collecting sticks, and the tiger attacked a 16-year-old girl and drug her off into the woods. Immediately, Jim started tracking. He went to the spot where the girl was attacked. He found the pug marks, which are feet prints. He saw bits of the woman's clothes just scattered around, and a few other gruesome details that I cannot tell you. And he started pursuing the tiger, and as he was doing so, he heard footprints coming out from behind him. And as he turned around, there was a man with a rifle who was sent out to help him. And he told the man, "Just go back, I do the stuff alone." And he's like, "Listen, I was told to come out here and help you, and I'm too afraid to say no to the people who told me to help." And instead of fighting the guy, he was just like, "All right, just follow me very closely and listen to everything I say." So they set out and began tracking. They continued following the tracks, going through thistles, up and down ravines, all sorts of stuff. And every so often, the man would grab Jim by the arm and just say, "I can hear the tiger. I can hear him everywhere." Like, the guy's freaking out. He's crying. He's just impeding the movement and being loud. And this is exactly why Jim didn't want anyone coming with them. Eventually, Jim's like, "You see that rock up there? Go straddle it, go sit up on it, and wait for me to get back." So the guy climbed up the rock and just sat there and watched. And Jim continued on. Eventually, Jim came across a creek, and this is where he saw a pretty gruesome sight. Pieces of bone were sitting there, a leg that had been, he said, bitten so cleanly below the knee that it looked like an axe had just chopped the leg off. And I would go into a little bit more detail, but that's even pushing it. It gets a lot worse than that. But again, I don't want to be demonetized. As he sat there looking at this, he began to realize, oh shit, I'm tracking a man-eating tiger and I'm just completely off guard. He raised his gun up and started looking around, and on the opposite end of this creek there was a little embankment, and he saw a little dirt roll down the embankment, and he saw the side of the tiger as it ran off into the woods. It was literally just watching him, and he had no idea. He just felt it, like his spider senses went off, and he's just like, yeah, he was very fortunate not to wait any longer, because that tiger was probably waiting to attack him. So he climbed up the embankment and started chasing the tiger down. Not running, but just like tracking the movements of the tiger. He could literally see the grass where it had just recently bent over and was picking back up. Like when an animal walks through grass, it does some of it, and if it completely breaks it off, it won't come up. But if it just pushes it over, you can kind of see the difference in colors, and then the grass just starts to heal itself. It'll literally just like come back up. And it was so fresh that he was literally watching the grass come back up again. So he kept on walking and following the tracks, and eventually he came to an area where there was a lot of rocks, there was a lot of cracks in the rocks that dipped down into these jagged edges. Like if he stepped in them, he's gonna break a leg, and there's grass in between these tufts, so he's just having a hard time following it. And then he would get close to the tiger, and every single time he did, he would hear it growling. He couldn't see it, but he knew it was only a few yards away. It would sit behind a bush, it would growl at him, and he's like, this tiger is probably not used to anyone legitimately tracking him. I want this thing to try to attack me, because if it does, I at least can get a shot off. But every time he got closer to it, it would just run off and he'd have to track it again. And he did this for like 4 hours. Eventually it started getting dark, and he realized, this is not the place I want to be. I have no chance against this thing at night. So he went back the way he came. He eventually came up on the man that was sitting on the rock, and they both went back to the village, and he went back to his bungalow to devise a plan. Now, he tried to get as many people as possible and he sent out for as many people as possible with any guns, whatever they could, to try to line them up in another one of those beat lines. And he put this plan together that he would go to one side of a ravine where the opposite side there was like these steep cliffs everywhere, you know, like mountain goats, and it's a little bit more open, not as jungly. And he would send this group of people on one line to make as much noise as possible while he ran down this ravine and waited in this area where he believed the tiger would be and try to shoot it as it came through. He didn't think many people would show up just because of how dangerous this would be, but to his surprise, just under 300 people with guns came through. And like, they were told, don't worry if this isn't a registered gun, just bring as many as possible, you're not going to get in trouble, we just need to get rid of this tiger. So he ended up lining these people up on this ridge, and he pointed at a pine tree that was a little farther down, kind of close to where he was going to be sitting, and he told a man that was going to be coming with him to wait by that pine tree so he could get another shot off, and that guy had a shotgun. So after everyone was lined up, there was people with drums, people with guns. He said, as soon as I wave this white handkerchief, start firing and start making as much noise as possible to try to scare this tiger out of this wooded area. So they began walking down to this pine tree, and again, it's like the side of a cliff hill. The mountain went up to about 2,000 feet. This is a very steep incline. And then at the bottom of it is multiple ravines, and that's where he believed the tiger would be. So he starts walking down, and the man that was with him was wearing leather shoes and is like, dude, my feet are killing me. I got blisters all of them. I need to just take these shoes off. So they're still hundreds of yards away from where they need to be. And as soon as the guy starts taking off his shoes, they thought, the line of people thought that was the signal, and they just started shooting and making the most crazy noise possible to scare this tiger. And at that instant, Jim's like, oh shit, I need to be over there. And he just bolted as fast as he could possibly go. And this man is running down the side of this steep incline with rocks everywhere. And he's like, any second, he should have tripped and fallen and broken his neck. But he's like, I had the wherewithal and the mentality of a mountain goat. I am going to get there. And he just had all the confidence in the world. And he bolted down that mountain and didn't fall or trip once. And he gets down to an area where he kind of wanted to be at the end of this ravine. And he just found the first tuft of grass that could somewhat conceal him. And he laid down right there with his rifle. There's about 2 feet of grass, and like as he's laying down, you can still see his back, so he wasn't completely covered up, but he's like, this is gonna have to do. Now, he only brought 3 rounds with him. He's like, this is all I'm going to need. If I get close enough to make a shot, he was a very good shot. This is all I'm going to need. So that's all he brought. After a few minutes, he saw the tiger run out of the exact spot he was hoping for. And before he could get a shot off, the man who was standing at the pine tree with the shotgun took a shot, and then the tiger stopped, turned around and started bolting back, and he went to go take a shot, and he did, but he missed, and he's like, his heart just sunk. Well, that's that. As soon as that happened, the chanting, the guns, they just stopped. They assumed that the tiger had been killed, and they let out a cheer, and he's like sitting there waiting. Well, this didn't go as I planned. He's like, now we're screwed. They stopped with the cheering and the guns going off. That's it. That's the only opportunity I got. That tiger's gone. But then that loud cheer made the tiger turn back around, and it came right down through the gorge. At that instant, he knew he had to take a shot, and he did. And at first, as soon as he made the shot, the tiger at this point is only about 30 feet away from him. Nothing happened. The tiger just stopped. And at first, he thought he missed, but then he realized that he did hit the tiger, but he hit it a little farther back than he wanted to. The tiger stopped and looked straight at him, and he shot again, this time hitting it in the shoulder. So at this point, all 3 of his rounds were done. It looked right at him, and he's like, I don't have any more rounds. If this tiger charges me, I'm done. And the tiger then ran off into some woods that were not too far away from him. He turned around and ran up the hill to the guy who was standing at the pine tree, and he grabbed his shotgun and ran towards where the tiger had gone. Now, he ran to where the tiger was, and it was standing on top of some rocks, and it was looking right at him, and it was growling, and it was roaring. It was just putting on a show. So he raises up the shotgun, and it was a double-barrel shotgun, and he noticed that when the guy fired the first time, it hadn't ejected the cartridge properly. He knew that if he shot this gun, there was a chance that it could explode in his face and blind him, if not worse. But he's like, I don't really have any options right now. I have to make this shot. So he lined up this rickety old thing with like a little bee. This was, again, the early 1900s. It's not like things are today. He raised up his gun and he took a shot at the tiger's open mouth. It didn't hit where he wanted it to. It hit it in the foot. That was all it needed. The tiger was basically dead. It lurched forward, it fell down, and it just died right there. Immediately, as this was happening, the group of men that were lined up, the hundreds of men, were already running down towards them and were screaming at the top of their lungs, cut it to bits. They had old swords, they had axes, they had machetes, all sorts of stuff. They wanted to cut this tiger to pieces. One guy ran up, this tiger killed my son, this tiger killed my wife, I'm gonna kill this thing, and like freaking out. And Jim was like, wait a second, hold on. He couldn't really put it into their perspective at the time. It took him a little while to think this over. He eventually understood why they wanted to do that. He was gonna skin it. Like, this is, you don't just cut it to pieces. It's dead now. Like, what's going on? The guys eventually all stopped. We're sorry that we're so pumped up right now. This animal killed so many of our friends and family. We're just emotional at this point. So as the crowd started to calm down a bit, Jim went to go look at this tiger, and he realized that the top canine tooth on one side was cut in half, and on the lower jaw, the canine tooth was broken off at the bone. So somebody had shot this tiger in the face and didn't kill it. So the tiger couldn't hunt the way it normally would and had to resort to easier prey. And then it got the taste for humans, and it's like, game on. These things are easy. So literally somebody shooting this tiger was the reason that ended up killing hundreds more. Now, the people then wanted to take the tiger and parade it around their villages, because if the women and children don't see this, they're not going to believe this tiger is dead. So Jim's like, do your thing. They did that, and they eventually came back. He skinned it, and they cut it up into little pieces. Like they took the bones and made them into trinkets and all sorts of other stuff to basically give them spiritual power against animals, so like they wouldn't be attacked, you know, the stuff they believed. They also found bits of the last victim in this tiger's stomach. A lot of them in the area were Hindu, so even the woman's leg that Jim had found in the woods not too long before was Hindu as well. He buried that leg where he knew the tiger couldn't get to it, so they could go back later and cremate it, because that's like they have to, even if it's a little fragment of a bone, they believe that they needed to cremate their dead in order for them to get to their afterlife. So they were able to get the bits and pieces of people from this tiger, were able to cremate them so they could, you know, go to their afterlife. So yeah, an incredible story of life in the early 1900s in areas where tigers just ate people sometimes, and they still do. Jim was obviously very brave, and he went off to do a whole bunch of other stuff. A lot of the passages that I have got a lot of this information from came directly from his book, and I'll put that in the link in the description below. His book also goes in the details about him hunting down man-eating leopards and all this stuff. This wasn't the only time something like this happened that Jim was involved with, but this is definitely one of the most incredible stories, because this tiger killed so many people. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what other videos or topics you would like me to go over. I have some stuff on the way that I'm excited to do, that it's going to be a little bit different than the storytelling stuff, but I do enjoy doing these stories, and I hope that you liked Mr. Champawat Tiger right there. You know, very detailed. This is my bearded dragon, Mr. Thomas. Oh, Sir Thomas, excuse me. Didn't like Mr. But anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you on the next one.